Right. Good evening, everybody. We have got a fantastic program in store for you tonight, so buckle your seatbelts because it's going to be real. Uh, Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge some special people here. First and foremost, I want to thank Beth and Mike Colson. They are the sponsors of this lecture series, and we are so very grateful. I'd also like to recognize some other special guests. Former Governor Jim Guy Tucker is here, and Betty Tucker. I think we have, if I'm missing some elected officials, you must let me know. But I believe, is Terry Hollingsworth here? I think she may be coming in later. There was another big event right before this, so if people walk in, that's totally fine. I'd also like to recognize a very, very special person, a longtime friend of mine, a former White House colleague, and former Chief of Protocol of the United States of America, Ambassador Capricia Panovic Marshall is in town. Woohoo! There are a lot of other former White House staff here. I'd be remiss if I started going through the list because there's so many of them. I see Bob here, and I see Kaki and Lottie and lots of other folks. Everybody turned out for you because you're Terry. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank my wonderful colleagues, the staff here at the Clinton Presidential Center, and our amazing volunteers. As I say every day, that we would not be able to open the doors, Governor, on any day without the volunteers. They are the folks that keep this place running, and we're really grateful for them. So as you know, Governor McAuliffe is here tonight to discuss his New York Times best-selling, and I think Washington Post rated it as one of their top books, Beyond Charlottesville, Taking a Stand Against White Nationalism. A pretty important topic right now. I think this will be a very lively discussion. But I want to tell you just a little bit about my longtime friend, Terry McAuliffe here. As you know, he was elected as the governor of Virginia in 2013. And as governor, he focused on equality for all Virginians, really enhancing quality of life and building a diversified economy that makes economic opportunity a right for everybody, not a privilege. And working across the aisle, he won bipartisan support to reform transportation, really revolutionized education, and to protect Virginians from gun violence. And he's been nationally recognized for his, this is my favorite stat, he's been nationally recognized for his work restoring more civil and voting rights than any governor in U.S. history. Yes, that really. And on a personal note, I know one of his proudest achievements as governor was restoring voting rights to Virginians with felony convictions that served their time and completed their terms of incarceration. A really monumental step and example to the rest of our nation. So thank you so much. And I think you all know he's had a storied career in politics. He was the chairman of the DNC, worked on all of the campaigns, and he's also been a lifelong entrepreneur since he was 14 years old. And this isn't his first New York Times bestseller. How many of you were here about, 11 years ago? In 2008, he had another best-selling New York Times book. What a Party, My Life Among Democrats, Presidents, Candidates, Donors, Activists, Alligators, and Other Wild Animals. That, too, was a New York Times bestseller.
Let me just say this. The nuns at St. Anne's Grammar School are rolling in their grave. To know that I had 2 New York Times bestsellers. Are you kidding me?
And finally, before I really start our serious conversation, I have to tell you that we would not be sitting here tonight in this beautiful Great Hall, in this incredible building, if it hadn't been for this man right here. Terry, literally single-handedly, well, I guess my boss helped a little bit too, but he single-handedly raised the $200 million to build this building and the park and all the renovations of the train station next door. Without Terry, this place would not be here. So we all owe you
I should tell you the funny story there, Stephanie. You remember because you set the meeting up.
Uh-oh.
So we go up to the Yellow Oval Room, the President, Hillary,
yes.
Bruce Lindsay, and myself. And then Cheryl Mills came in at the end. And whenever the President would call me over for lunch,
For lunch,
it was never like he wanted to see me or check on my health. It was always a very expensive lunch. So he invited me over, and this is in 1998 when the thought of this was just an idea. So, and I knew the game, and he was going to go through his thing, and Hillary, and I'm going to go back, blah, blah, blah. And at the end of it, I said, fine, I get it. I said, Mr. President, we'll raise $100 million, which a lot of money in Little Rock.
Oh,
I
wow.
said, this thing will be great, fine. We shook hands. I said, $100 million. I'll get you $100 million, Mr. President. Okay, great. God love him. He spent $200 million.
Well, the first one was a $375 million version. Yeah.
Now we got this beautiful German glass. Remember all the stuff we went through? The glass from Germany. Oh, but it's beautiful, folks.
It is.
Can't do the best for the folks here in Arkansas.
That's right. That's right. Well, I'd like to start with really a personal question as you talk about the horrific events that took place literally 2 years ago this month. In reading your book, I was so touched by the foreword by civil rights icon John Lewis. Can you talk a little bit about your really special relationship and what it meant to you to have him write the foreword to this important book?
So it was interesting. The 2-year anniversary was Monday, where we had 1,000 neo-Nazis and white supremacists come into our state. They came from 39 states. And I'll be honest with you, I've never in my life seen anything like it. Screaming the most vile things against African Americans, telling members of the Jewish faith, we're going to burn you like we burned you in Auschwitz. You just don't understand how people can say these things and act like these things. And Friday night, actually, people don't talk about Friday night, I talk about in the book. Friday night, if you're at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, there's a big hill, big mountain there. There's no buildings on, it's all dark. And about 9 o'clock, all you could see was a snake of torches coming down. And the chants, as they got closer and closer, were Jews, you will not replace us, blood and soil. All the chants, folks, from 1933, 1934, Nazi Germany. And then Saturday was, they had their swastikas, their Adolf Hitler ideology. I got to tell you, I'd never in my life seen anything like it. So we'll get into it, but on Monday, after I gave my speech, after the President of the United States totally lost the moral authority for our country and didn't do what he needed to do, I gave my speech. And then John Lewis called me up Monday, and he said, Governor, I want you to know that your speech brought tears to my eyes. And for me to have John Lewis, who went through what he went through, and I was beaten up and all the things. And so when, in fact, Steve and I went up and met with him, and asked him to do the foreword. He said he'd be honored to do the foreword. In the first part of the book, he does it. The last part of the book, he and I collaborated on how we go from here.
And we'll definitely get into that topic as well. Can you talk, you mentioned the Friday night, can you talk a little bit about the lead up to this and how you were preparing for what you had heard was, it was a protest against the Confederate monuments. Talk a little bit about the lead up and your planning, and did you ever expect it to turn into something like this?
So, and I go through, you'll find it fascinating in the book, I go through all the preparations that we had done. I was the first Virginia governor to call out the Guard in a domestic situation in 45 years. I had sent 979 state police down there. But we knew about, and I talk about in the book, about 2 months before, it came down the issue of Confederate monuments. And we have a big issue in Virginia on Confederate monuments. We were the capital of the Confederacy, as you all know. I talk in the book, I'm from upstate New York. I had not dealt with these issues. I talk about, my first event running for governor. I went with a van. I don't know if Jan Pascal's here. Is Jan here with me tonight? Jan's son, Justin Pascal, worked for me when I was chairman of the DNC, and he helped me on my governor's race. And we went to my first event when I'm running for governor up in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and I'm in giving my speech, and Justin's waiting in the back by the bar for me to finish, and a young lady comes up to him and says, young man, you need to be careful. He said, what do you mean I need to be careful? She said, there's a Ku Klux Klan rally down the street. And I'll be honest with you, folks, I didn't know the Ku Klux Klan was still having rallies. I didn't. As I say, I'm from Syracuse, New York. We didn't experience some of these issues. A couple of weeks later, I'm campaigning with my wife at an event, and my wife hands the gentleman my flyer, said, I'd love you to vote for my husband. And this guy who ran this huge event with 1,000 people said, I'll never vote for your husband. I hate your husband. He's an N lover. And I got to tell you, I just wasn't prepared for any of this when I ran for governor of Virginia. So I knew when I got into the governorship, I'm going to have to deal with a lot of these very difficult issues. And so then I was confronted with the issue of the Confederate flag. I used executive authority as governor. I took it off the license plate. I banned it, and that became a big hoorah in the Commonwealth. But the Confederate flag, I don't have to tell anybody here in Arkansas, is an offensive symbol to the African American community. It's offensive. And I've become governor of a state that is just crippled economically because of sequestration. We're the #1 state for defense spending. 27 military installations. We have the largest naval base in the world, Norfolk Naval Station, Norfolk Port, biggest naval base in the world we have. And sequestration had really knocked us on our heels. So when I became governor, I inherited a gigantic deficit. Second biggest in the history of the state. I didn't know about it when I was running. Virginia had just passed horrible anti-women legislation. In 2013, we had one of the worst bills in the country. We became a laughingstock. Horrible anti-gay legislation. So I came and I ended all that. I vetoed all their bills. They had bills to shut our 27 women's clinics down. I fired the Board of Health right immediately in office. All of my women's clinics stayed open. Actually, 2 more opened while I was governor to protect women's rights. And so I was trying to make Virginia an open and welcoming state because I needed to recruit businesses. I was traveling the globe, trying to bring companies in. They're not coming to a state that discriminates. They're not. So I was able to be successful in doing that. And then the Confederate monument issue came up. And listen to this. Virginia, as you know, the American Revolution started in Virginia. Patrick Henry, give me liberty, give me death at St. John's Church. So it's a big part of our history. The Revolutionary War ended in Virginia at the Battle of Yorktown when General Cornwallis was defeated. Big part of our history. World War I, the war to end all wars. World War II, we lost a lot of folks. Guess how many monuments to those 3 big events? About a dozen. The Confederate, the Civil War, 378.
Wow.
And many of them were built during massive resistance. So what happened, Stephanie, is, so the city of Charlottesville voted to take the Lee Monument down, and I knew right off we were headed for trouble. So I called the head of my state police into my office. I said, we got to fire up our fusion center. And, I got to be careful with all the cameras, but we had done some embedding of state police and undercover operations. I worked very closely with the FBI and the DHS. They were being told, these white nationalists and neo-Nazis, you're going to come to Virginia, you're coming August 12th, you're going to bring weapons with you, and you're going to hurt people. We knew this, and we were tipped off. We knew exactly what was going on.
As a result of the white supremacist, and a specific white supremacist who deliberately drove his car into the crowd of counter-protesters, lives were lost. Not only the young woman, but also 2 of your state troopers. Can you talk about how those tragic events sort of changed you, obviously as a human being, but also your approach to dealing with the situation, and did it change did you evolve as a governor or your leadership style?
So as I say, we prepared, I called out the guard, and it's interesting, so I'm sure it's the same here in Little Rock, and Governor, you can help me with this. If there's an event in Little Rock, the city of Little Rock runs it. The state, if I send down support, here, the state of Arkansas is in support of the city for most states. So even though I had most of the troops and most of the law enforcement, we still were in a support role, which I talk about. The permit should never have been approved in the park it was in. This park, Emancipation Park, folks, it's about twice the size of this room.
Wow.
Think about it. 1,000 armed neo-Nazis, white supremacists, 2,000 counter-protesters. The key to controlling a protest is to keep the two sides separated. That is always the goal. And we had no ability. And Wednesday night, at our urging, we told the city, you got to move it out of Emancipation Park. You got to put it up in McIntyre Park. Gigantic park. We could have kept the two sides separated. They filed to move it to McIntyre Park. 2 days later, they wait 2 days. The ACLU, whom I respect greatly, but they were not right in this situation, sided with the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists and filed suit to keep it at Emancipation Park on a Friday, 9 o'clock before the rally.
Wow.
The judge ruled to keep it at Emancipation Park. Now, I'm a big supporter, folks, of First Amendment, but if law enforcement is telling you, we cannot keep you safe, that should trump. And what happened is many of the members of the ACLU board quit, who said, we're not here to protect neo-Nazi First Amendment rights. So it goes to there. I mentioned the issues we had on Friday night. So Saturday morning, I keep my schedule as governor. The last thing is, Governor, I will tell you, you don't want the governor in the command center. You got your law, you got my colonel of state police, I got my generals, they're there running it. You don't want me there telling you what to do. You have professionals do their work. I continue with my schedule up in Northern Virginia. I begin to get calls about 6:30, 7 from my secretary of the public safety who's on the ground in Charlottesville. Starts relaying things back. About 9 o'clock, he sends me pictures, and wow, there's all of these folks in military uniforms, all of them with semi-automatic rifles, all of them with, revolvers strapped to every part of their body. And I call up Brian, my secretary, Brian Moran. I say, are they ours? He says, I don't know who the hell they are. I says, well, go ask them. So he leaves the phone. I goes up to the first guy and says, who are you with? He says, well, I can't talk to you, sir. You got to talk to my commanding officer. What? Who's your commanding officer? So he goes to the top guy and says, we're the Pennsylvania militia. I think we had Arkansas militia. We had New York militia. We had all of these. So on top of the 1,000 neo-Nazis with guns, we now have all this militia there. So I'm getting concerned, and obviously with all this going on. And then I finally talking about, and finally Brian Moran, the skirmishes go on at about 11:15. Remember, the rally's supposed to start at noon and go till 5 o'clock. But I've been getting calls now. The synagogue has now removed the Torah. People are getting beat up on the streets. These people are just nuts. And about 11:15, I declare a state of emergency. I said, I've had enough. The rally wasn't supposed to start till noon to 5. And we clear the park in about 15 minutes. I send in the state police, secure the park, and then I send in the guard, and then they take over the park. 11:50, 11:55, 5 minutes before the rally, everything's great. It's at this point that the white phone rings, and it's operator 1 from the White House. Now, as Stephanie knows, I used to get a 1 o'clock call every morning.
I got the 2 o'clock call.
Yeah, but I got one.
And
it was
Capricia
President
got
Clinton.
the 3
Matt
a.m.
McCarty
call.
knows it well. You're all in bed. My wife says, oh, God, don't answer it. Because, you didn't get Bill Clinton off the phone. But, I hadn't heard from old operator 1 in a while. And they said, the president would like to speak to you. I said, fine. He said, finish up. He'll call you in 5 minutes. We'll call you back in 5 minutes. I said, great. 5 minutes later, the president gets on the phone. I explained to the president what's going on. I said, I got 1,000 of these horrible neo-Nazis, white supremacists. They're beating everybody up. They're all armed. They're screaming. They got Adolf Hitler T-shirts. They got swastikas. Honestly, think about this, folks. The Nazis exterminated 6 million members of the Jewish faith. And they now are wearing T-shirts? Think about this for a second. What goes into your mind that you think this is acceptable behavior? Really? Every other word was the F and N word. Every woman was called the F and C word. And the Jewish, it was unbelievable. So I said to the president, Mr. President, this thing is out of control. I said, we've now secured the park. But I said, sir, and I dealt with him in fairness for quite a while. Well, I've known him for 25 years. In full disclosure, he gave me $25,000 when I ran for governor. He was a Democrat his whole life.
Yeah. He gave to everybody.
Yeah, this is a charade.
Yeah.
He was pro-choice, pro-gay. This is a joke. But whatever, we're not getting into that tonight. But and my point is I'd known the man for a very long time, seen him a lot, I'd golfed with him and had dinner with him and whatever. And I was chairman of the National Governors Association. So for a year, I had to deal with him on behalf of the 50 governors on health care and Muslim ban and ICE raids and all that. So I had a lot of dealings with him. And I said, Mr. President, you've got to stop this hate speech. It's dividing our country. It's hurting us. It's hurting our economy, which I probably shouldn't have said, because then he goes into a 10-minute deal. Oh, let me tell you about the economy. Lowest African-American unemployment, whatever. And at the end, but he says, Terry, I want to work with you on this. I felt great. I hang up the phone. I said, Mr. President, you do your press conference. I'll wait for you. And then, interesting, folks, what happened? He was up in New Jersey, where he is now, and he was going to do his press conference. A half an hour goes by. An hour goes by. An hour and a half goes by. 2 hours go by. 2.5.
Wasn't he supposed to do it like literally right when you got off the phone?
Walk right out and do it?
Yeah.
I know what happened, Stephanie. Bannon or Miller or whoever in the White House got a hold of the president and said, no, sir. You are not going to condemn neo-Nazis. You're not going to condemn white supremacists. In fact, you will not even use their name. And he finally came out, and if you remember, he didn't say neo-Nazi or white supremacist, and he said they were good people on both sides. That is when President Trump, to me, lost his moral authority as President of the United States. This is not partisan political, folks. You look to a president in a time like this. Bill Clinton had Oklahoma City. Barack Obama had San Diego. Barack Obama had Charleston. George Bush had 9/11. There are times in our country where you got to stand up and do the right thing. He failed that day. And at that point, so I now am Northern Virginia. I am now I felt like I was kicked in the gut. I just couldn't believe it. And so the helicopter Fairfax 1 from Fairfax flew me down to Charlottesville. But about an hour before that, Brian Rand says, it's good, we have no property damage, we've had some fights. And then a 32-year-old, this James Fields, weaponized his car and literally ran down a street of Charlottesville, injuring 35 people and killing 32-year-old Heather Heyer. Just revved his car, backed it up, and then just hit the full gas and ran through a whole city street in Charlottesville.
It's unimaginable.
Unimaginable how you could even think that this could happen. And so I said, I got to go. I flew down, and just as I'm landing, Trooper 1, who is the Virginia governor's helicopter that the state police fly me on, they're there all day doing surveillance. We see them, we have a conversation with them, and they're going to come over and do escort to take my big motorcade in because there are a lot of police. And just as soon as I got in the car, Mark Wiley, the head of my state police security unit, says, Governor, aircraft has just gone down. Now, Charlottesville didn't have a lot of planes in the air, but we do have a small airport. But I just had this sinking feeling in my gut. So I drove to where the press conference site was, and now the whole world's watching, and because Trump has so screwed it up. And I knew what I had to do, and I'm just about to walk out through the door to come in, and there's thousands of cameras, and they tell me that, Governor, your Trooper 1 went down, and my pilot and a member of my security detail were killed. Burke Bates was the co-pilot who had been on my security. We loved Burke Bates. I tell great stories in the book. When we moved to Richmond, my daughter Sally was going to have to go to a new high school, a freshman. It's not easy. She moves to a new city. She's got to start a new school. She doesn't know anybody. Her dad's governor. You know the deal. And so Burke drove her that day. So he takes her in one of the big state police SUVs, and he drives up, and Sally's a wreck. You can imagine going to a new school, doesn't know anybody. And so she says, Burke would just go up. And she was very quiet. I just want to slip in. But as you pull up, all the seniors are out to meet him. And Sally could have died. She just wanted to sneak in, and nobody noticed her. Burke turns on the siren and lights. Sally McAuliffe has arrived. And says it twice on the microphone on the car. Just mortified her. But she said, at the end of the day, and the last time I saw Burke, I mean, I love this guy. I mean, you know, your security detail, they're with you 24/7. Loved him. And last time I saw Burke, he came over to the house. He always wanted to be a pilot. So he was leaving my security detail to become a state police pilot on the helicopters. And he came in, and we had a nice little chat, and he walked out. He said, you know, I just sent Jack a care package. Jack was my son, who was a captain in the Marine Corps who was deployed to Iraq. And he said, I just sent Jack a great care package. I said, oh, Burke, that's so nice. What'd you send him? He said, oh, I sent him some cigars, which my son had requested. There's not much to do in Iraq desert at the end of the night but smoke cigars. He said, I sent him some magazines. I said, that's great. He'll love Newsweek. He said, oh, Governor, a little more colorful than Newsweek. A little more entertaining. I said, okay. And then he says, oh, and I sent him a whole bottle of Irish whiskey. I says, Burke, you can't send booze to the military, let alone in a Muslim country where alcohol is banned. Oh, he says, don't worry. I put it in a Listerine bottle. That is literally the last thing I heard from Burke Bates. And then he perished that day. So I then went out, and as most of you know, because you probably watched it that day, I took no notes. I spoke for 12 minutes from my heart, and I told these people, these neo-Nazi, I said, get the hell out of Virginia. We don't want you here. Get out of America. You pretend you're patriots. You're a bunch of cowards. You think you hurt us. You didn't hurt us. You made us stronger. And I did what the President of the United States of America, folks, should have done that day.
I appreciate you referencing that former presidents, regardless of party, have always risen to the occasion. You talked about President Bush, President Obama. Why is this president, why is he unable to, what do you think? I mean, this was such a horrific moment in our country. It was time, I mean, you felt optimistic after your phone call.
And he doubled down, if you remember. He got in so much trouble after the speech, remember, on August 12th. Yeah. Remember Gary Cohn, his economic advisor, said he was going to quit, and people really were angry. Mm-hmm. And he came out about a week later, and he tried to make amends, and then he doubled down again. And most of you probably have been on TV a lot recently. The book's been out. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't say this lightly, folks, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, because I respect the office of the presidency. The man supports white supremacist views. I don't say it easily, and I'm embarrassed I'm saying this about our president. But, you know, let's be clear. When he ran for president, he tweeted and retweeted neo-Nazi stuff, white supremacist stuff. He called Mexicans rapists, criminals, murderers. We remember all that. He called for a total, remember when Donald J. Trump calls for a total ban of all Muslims in America. I mean, this is what he did. You know, he went after the Squad. Mm-hmm. He went after Elijah Cummings and rat-infested Baltimore. And Stephanie, I can't answer it because politically, he has lost women. He has lost non-college educated women have left him in droves. I don't know what his theory is. But let's be honest, you know, he's had a history of this in the 70s. Right. He was sued by the Nixon Justice Department. I mean, you know how hard that is? I mean, think of that. Because they would not rent to African Americans. And whites would go in. Do you have apartments? Yes, we got dozens. Blacks would go in. No, we don't have any. And he got sued, he and his father. You know, when he owned Trump Castle in New Jersey, when all the employees said when he arrived, no blacks were allowed to be on the casino floor, any workers. They had to go out the back. I mean, so there's a history here. Mm-hmm. The man never should be president of the United States of America. That's a whole nother conversation. But the damage that he has done to split America. You know, I ran a state where we had racial issues. My whole goal was to bring people together. And as bad as Charlottesville was, the one benefit, folks, is it ripped off the scab of racism. I think for far too long in this country, especially whites, it's an uncomfortable topic, felt that they dealt with issues of racism and it had gone away. Well, it hasn't. No. And I really make the point in the book that we got inequities in school systems today in our country. As long as children don't get the same quality education, that's racism. As long as they don't get the same health care, or housing opportunity. That is racism. We can't pretend it doesn't exist. And the one thing about Charlottesville, it awoke everybody to say, yeah, it's here. I really talk a lot in the book about my criminal justice reform. I reformed the criminal justice system. Virginia had a horrible racist criminal justice system. I reduced the juvenile detention population by 2/3. I now have the lowest recidivism rate of any state in America. You now go, if you're in prison in Virginia, you get 5 college courses. I mean, I want people back in society, and I restored more felon rights. I did more pardons, which didn't surprise anybody. But our criminal justice system, Stephanie, I pardoned a guy leaving office. I did a lot of pardons. Lenny Singleton was his name, young man. Lenny was a drug addict. He had a problem. He should have been in rehab. He should have been in a drug court. He committed 5 robberies. The most he stole, 5 robberies combined, was $535, okay? And nobody was ever injured. So for $535, what do you think his sentence was in Virginia? Michael, for $535, how much?
50 years.
How many? 50. Beth? A year. Mac? 20. 2 life sentences plus 130 years. Folks, it's happening out there. I could sit here and give you 10 of those examples. That's just Virginia. I'm sure Arkansas has some doozers too. 2 life sentences, 130 years for $535. My point is, wake up. Politicians got to quit talking. They got to start doing something. We got to shake the system up.
Before I open this up for questions from the audience, I want to take a moment to acknowledge a former boss of mine that snuck in as we were talking, Mac McClarty, my boss at the White House, former chief of staff, and Donna McClarty. We're so pleased that you all are both here. Mac ran a pretty tight ship at the White House, and what troubles me too is seeing the staff that are around this president that you know, our job was not to be yes people. Our job was to tell the truth, to try to support the chief of staff who made sure we were in lockstep and that that we were putting the interest of the country first. And I just want to thank Mac for his incredible leadership during the first term in the White House. All right, we're going to...
But I think that's a good point you should mention. That there's nobody in this Trump White House that will go to the president and tell him he's wrong. Mm-hmm. Mac would do it, not all the time, but if he had an issue with President Clinton and the cabinet had the ability to do that, Clinton may not have liked it, Barack Obama may not have liked it, George Bush may not, but they did it. There's none of this that goes on in this way, and that's very dangerous for a democracy. It really is.
Sure, it really is. All right, please wait. If you'll raise your hands, we'll call on you, and one of my colleagues will bring you a microphone. I think right over here. Dawn?
You mentioned the pardon. I want to ask you, what do you think we could do to make equality in sentencing? What could we do in this country to make equality in sentencing? I serve on the parole board here, so I see it every day. And what could the country do to make equality in sentencing, as you just mentioned?
Yeah. Well, that's a loaded question. It's a hard question, but let me put the pardons aside. First of all, I talk about in the book that, you know, you're not born this way. You were really not born to say, I want to burn you alive like I did in August. I mean, you're really not. We have to do a better job in our education system early. So one of the things, you know, you'll read it in the book. I started 2 big after action reports. We now teach diversity training beginning in kindergarten through 6th grade. We wait too long, and many school districts don't do it at all. You got to, when you go to school, it's important to me as history or math or English. How do you interrelate? How do you socialize with one another? How do you treat everybody with dignity and respect? And that's probably the most important thing. But We also, when you have a child who goes to an inferior school without the same quality teacher, whose school supplies are not the same, the infrastructure may not be the same, to me that's racism, because that child is going to be at a disadvantage their whole life. So we got to lean. I was very proud as governor. I put $1 billion into K-12. I had school districts that were unfair in Richmond, Virginia, Norfolk, Virginia, Petersburg, Virginia. I put money in there. I didn't put them in the wealthy, affluent areas. I put it in where they need it. And if teachers, I went to every former retired teacher in Virginia, and I said, I did a special law that you can come back and teach. You won't lose your retirement benefits. Incentivize people to come back. And if you go into one of these areas where it's more difficulties, we'll pay you more. We'll give you tax incentives. That's what we have to start doing. But the criminal justice system, and you mentioned the pardons. So, when I was a very activist governor, it should surprise nobody in this room. But, I wanted to have an open and welcoming affair. So I banned the box immediately, executive order. I outlawed any discrimination based on sexual orientation. That was my first executive order. I leaned in. That's why I love being a governor. Boy, executive with the man, boom, 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 boom. God dang, I love that thing. Every day I'd be firing that pen up. That's why I'd never be a senator or a congressman. I don't mean it, or congressman. It's not disrespect. They don't do anything. God dang, when you are a governor, boy, you are lighting it up every. Is Senator Pryor still here? You know what I'm saying, though. You know what I'm saying. But my point is, one of the biggest problems we had. Listen to this, and I'm not sure what the Arkansas law is, but in 40 states, it's automatic that when you finish your time, you get your voting rights back. In 10 states, mostly the southern states, you don't get those rights back. Virginia was one of 3 states that permanently disenfranchised you for the rest of your life. So if you're a felon in Virginia, and the felon threshold, folks, is $200. So if you're 16, 17 years old, you steal some sneakers or an iPhone, you are a felon. You lose your voting rights for the rest of your life. That's not fair. And so I wanted to end that practice, but I could never get it done legislatively. So on April 12th of 2016, I went in the steps of the Capitol, where in 1902, a state senator by the name of Glass put it in our Constitution. And his quote that day was, "I am doing this to eliminate the darky from being a political factor in Virginia." That was his quote. And it was in all the newspapers. Well, a new sheriff in town 114 years later, and with a swipe of my pen, I destroyed 114 years of racist disenfranchisement, and I gave 206,000 people. But my battle wasn't done. What happened? The Republican senator and Senate Majority Leader, Speaker and Senate Majority Leader, rushed to the Supreme Court of Virginia, which were one of 2 states where the Supreme Court's appointed by the legislature, South Carolina and Virginia, and sued me. But the Constitution of Virginia is very clear. I have 4 enumerated powers. This was clearly one of them. Now, I'm not going to lie to anybody in this audience. I went to Georgetown Law School. I went full-time day. I ran 3 companies while I was going to law school. I never physically went into Georgetown Law School. It is the biggest law school in the country. They don't take attendance. I had great friends who gave me notes, and I was good on those study guides. Now, I graduated, and I'm a member of the bar.
Don't listen to this,
You are never going to
girls.
hire me to be your lawyer. I'm going to be the first person to tell you that. Even I knew with that limited legal background that I had the authority. But the Supreme Court ruled, unbelievable, 4 weeks later, we're not going to let Governor McAuliffe do it because no governor's done it before. Well, that's not a constitutional theory. I even knew that. No one's ever been impeached either, but you know what? You can still do it if you want in Virginia. Yeah. But they said, no, we're not going to let them do it. We're going to make them do it individually. Really? Really? I said, as soon as I read that, I said, get my staff. I said, get all 206,000 petitions, about this high. I said, take them all out front of the Capitol, the Civil Rights Memorial, bring a box of pens. I'm going to sign every damn one. I don't care if it takes me a week. I'm going to sign every single one myself. If that's what the court wants, I'm going to do it. And they immediately rushed to the Supreme Court and sued me for contempt of court. The only Virginia governor to be sued for contempt of court. And I loved it. Loved it. I'm fighting for people, and they're suing me. And now I had every editorial page in the country supporting me, and they saw what was going on, and finally, the Supreme Court said, no, if he's doing it individually. So here's the best part of the story. So they now said, 206 can get their rights back. I took all 206,000 petitions, had them all printed on a beautiful parchment with the seal of the Commonwealth and my signature. I put them all in individual envelopes to mail to all 206,000 with a voter registration form and a stamped, self-addressed envelope to send it back to the registrar, all paid for at state expense. Boom. So my point is, long answer to your question, you got to lean in. You got to hit politicians talk too much. Dude, my last sentence.
Yep.
Read the last sentence.
In the book?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was going to save that till the end. But
no, save it to the end. Well, we're sort of at a crescendo with my statement.
No,
but
let me do it. I'll come up. I'll make up something else at the end. Hold on. Let me read it.
Well, we got everybody hot now.
Yeah, we got it.
You know what I'm saying?
I don't want to lose the momentum. I'm trying to find it here. Hold on. Okay. I'm going to actually read the last paragraph. My message to everybody is stop being comfortable. Stop believing we've come so far. As Charlottesville has proven, we haven't. I'd like to thank all the peaceful protesters who came out in Charlottesville to oppose hate. That wasn't comfortable. You won't feel comfortable when you're out there working for change. You won't feel comfortable taking on hatred and bigotry. Forget reconciliation commissions. Words, words, words. It's a bunch of white people sitting around trying to feel comfortable to talk a problem to death. But it doesn't bring change. Action brings change. Do something. Do it now. Yes, sir. All right. I think I saw a young man here a few minutes ago that has had his hand up.
I just have a question about since after Charlottesville.
Talking to the mic, I bet my ears are hurting.
After Charlottesville, of course, your views on race would have changed, saying that in this country today, racism is alive and thriving. So if you could, with your current attitude about race, if you could go back to those 2 days in Charlottesville, what would you do differently to react to the events that took place?
What would I do differently in Charlottesville?
Now that the time has passed and we've seen the things that have happened in our country, would you do anything differently?
Well, a good question. So immediately after Charlottesville happened, I called for an after-action report. I hired the International Association of State Police to come in and do independent reviews. You always can find fault, and the book's not about laying blame or fault, or I really talk about how we go forward. But I did, through executive order, change the permitting process in Virginia. The biggest problem we had is, as I say, they were all in this very small park. It was impossible. Some of the counter-protesters are angry at the police that they didn't keep them separated. But I can tell you that physically, logically, logistically, there was no way you could keep people separated. The Charlottesville police had an agreement with the white nationalists and the protesters that they would come into one entrance on the park. Well, guess what happened? They didn't honor that commitment, and they came in from it became bedlam within a half an hour. And so, immediately after they filed a petition, and let me say this, I want to be clear. Supposedly they were coming to protest the Lee statue. Folks, none of these knuckleheads knew who Robert E. Lee was. They didn't. They were there to spew hatred. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump had given them the green light from the things he had said. Well, goodness, if the president can say this.
Wasn't David Duke there at the...
David Duke was large and in charge. And he said, we are here to fulfill the Trump agenda. That's all. And no, if you look at, the quotes from the people, that they felt that they couldn't do this before. And what happened, I say in the book, when Barack Obama got elected, I think for many people, not many, some people in our country, to have a black man in the White House was too much. But they didn't really act on it. And then comes along Trump with the birther movement, and he was born, he's Muslim, and he wasn't born here, and stirring and stirring and stirring. And then, of course, he gets elected, and he goes on his tirades about this, and they're stealing your jobs, and people feel comfortable that, well, he's doing this, I can do it. Mm-hmm. I talk a lot about in the book about how we got to this place in this great country and what has happened. But to answer your question, so right after Charlottesville, they filed a petition to come to Richmond to do it at our Lee statue. The Richmond statue is on state property. That means I get to control it as governor. We only have a few, but that one I get to control. So as soon as they filed the petition, I filed an executive order that said no permits will be given. Of course, the ACLU immediately came out and said, I'm destroying First Amendment rights. No. How many people have been to Richmond? You've been to Monument Ave, okay? The Lee Monument, it's on this little roundabout. The permit, as it existed for 50 years, allowed 5,000 people. Folks, 5,000. If I stacked them 50 tall on their shoulders, I can't get 5,000. So I stopped the permit. So I changed the whole permitting process. And now, and the one thing, listen, I don't want to be critical, but when that permit came into Charlottesville, the city should have, it should never have been in Lee Park. Or when they figured as many people were coming, they should have moved it earlier, but whatever. But they should have banned poles, sticks, masks, aerosol cans. Because they took
Torches.
No action, it was approved in it the way they filed it with zero restrictions. So I think the most important thing probably is a lot on the permitting process that we can do. You can't end hatred. I don't like what these people say, but they have every right to march. And I'm fine with that, unless they're going to hurt people or do damage to property. And I tried to, I went on radio and TV before trying to tell folks, don't come out and counter-protest. Because my feeling was these goofballs would walk down the street, and if no one was there, they'd march with their swastikas and their Hitler shirts and all that stuff. And they'd get tired of walking, and they'd hit the first Kentucky Fried Chicken joint, and it'd be over. But what happened is 2,000 on the other side, and they got every right to come out too, and then it just became a horrible melee. But, sitting here, we committed the resources. Oh, and the other thing I should tell you, which is important, I'm glad you raised the point. The one thing we changed in Virginia, we no longer have this situation where if a city has an incident, they're in charge. No more. If I'm the governor and I'm committing the most National Guard troops and the most state police, now unified command. They were waiting for the city to declare an unlawful assembly to send the troops in. They were supposed to do it first. I did it. I was tired of waiting, and I sent it in, and within a minute of me calling it, folks moved in and cleared the park.
We know a little something about sending the troops in the shadow of Little Rock Central High School here. And anyway, let's see over here, I think in the back of the room.
You talk about being from New York. I was raised here, and the subject of Reconstruction was boiled down to two things: scalawags and carpetbaggers. There was no discussion of slavery or anything. I'm wondering what you from a northern state were taught about it, and what is being taught now. Is that part of your education plan, that people are now learning about slavery and what happened after the Civil War ended?
Yeah, and I make the point that, I was born in New York, and I was governor of the capital of the Confederacy. But I'll be honest with you, growing up in Syracuse, New York, I'm 62 years old. I was born in 1957. So for many of the issues that went on the civil rights movement, I was in my backyard playing football with my buddies. I mean, it really, for me, moving to Virginia was a eye-opening experience. I mentioned a couple of the incidences that I personally felt. But let me be clear. You're going to always have bad eggs, always, and it doesn't, we're a state of 8.5 million people. I wasn't going to let a couple of these people define. We're a nation of 335 million people. Don't let these 1,000 people define who we are. You're always going to have haters. But to be honest with you, I hadn't seen that before, and I hadn't experienced it. So for me, coming in to be governor of Virginia, with my background that I'd come from a business background. I'd started dozens of companies. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. That attitude coming in that we got to make our state open and welcoming, treating everybody with dignity and respect. I didn't come in with any harbored any prejudice. I just didn't. And I actually think that was a good thing. New, fresh blood with some new ideas. And I'll be honest with you, folks, I mean, you'll read about it in the book, but as they say, I left the biggest surplus in the history of the Commonwealth. I created the most jobs of any governor. This stuff works when you treat everybody. And why I was so upset with Charlottesville, when they talked about, things that had happened, I knew this was going to be a black eye for us because all these people spewing their hatred. And one of the reasons that I wrote the book is, last year I went to 25 states. I was thinking of running for president of the United States. And I went around testing the waters. But everywhere I went, people asked me about Charlottesville. Most people thought that the people protesting were Virginians, were from Charlottesville. They weren't from Virginia at all. They came from 39 states. The web was so dangerous to recruit all these peoples. Now, the web was dangerous, but I will also tell you the social media was great because the counter-protesters took pictures of everybody, put them up on social media, and I talk about in the book, 2 Marines lost their jobs. The guy who worked at the Berkeley hot dog stand got fired. So the good news about all of this is the neo-Nazi and white supremacists, they came to hurt us in Virginia. They didn't. They physically hurt, killed Heather Heyer, but they made us stronger. And I do think at the end of the day, it makes our country stronger. And their whole operation, I mean, many of them, over a dozen, have been indicted, convicted, and sent to jail. Dozens have lost their jobs. I tell the story of Kessler. He has no place to live because of his legal bills. He's in his father's bedroom trying to recruit, and his father comes in and screams at him, "Get out of my bedroom, you child." I mean, that's how far the leader of the Unite the Right rally has fallen. And tried to do a press conference, and a woman came up and slapped him, and he scooted out. I mean, they're done. They tried to come back to Washington a year later. Maybe 10 people showed up. So the good news is that this was their big moment. This was it, folks. And then because of that, their movement really got hurt. But I'll be very honest with you. What I'm very concerned about, I'd rather have them out in the open like they were in Charlottesville. What is very disconcerting to me is now you have lone wolves who are not out in public, like you saw the other day in El Paso, the people who are at home and they pick up an AK-47 and they walk into a Walmart or they go to Pepper's Bar in Dayton, Ohio. And that's what we got to be concerned about. The bottom line, we got to stop this hate speech.
Yes.
Governor Jerry Malone, an issue that tags on what you just finished with that I know Stephanie probably remembers and those in the administration, President Clinton held in his second term a White House conference where there was a former skinhead on race dealing with, he was explaining about how he was in the military. He was recruited in the military to become a skinhead and go into the race nationalist movement and come out and join local police forces, the state police forces. And so we're seeing a lot of this embedded in our state and local police now, dealing from those years. And so just as you were saying, not in public, but now being embedded. How do we deal with those embedded white nationalists in police, state and local police and so forth?
Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, I just read in Richmond, one of the members of our Capitol Police was on one of these white nationalist, sites, social sites. Luckily, he was just fired. The one thing I think we need to do as a country, and Director Wray, who's the FBI director, testified in Congress a couple weeks ago, talked about terrorism in the world. As it relates to America, half the terrorism is now domestic homegrown. This is so 50% international, which we dealt with Al-Qaeda and all the groups we deal with, but 50% now is homegrown domestic terrorism. And so we've got to do a much better job on social media. We can't allow these sites to be up that are spewing their hatred. And the second anyone mentions violence, these people need to be arrested. I mean, we just got to really, it's dangerous what's happening out there. And they're all, and I hate to say it, until we get rid of Donald Trump, the best thing we can do to end this is to get rid of Donald Trump. I'm not saying that. We just need the next president to be a healer, to say we're going to bring people together. And that's what a big piece of what this election is going to be about. We can't tolerate, I mean, every day. I mean, how about Stephen King yesterday? That we wouldn't have a population in this country but for rape and incest. Really? I mean, we got to end this stuff.
We can't
folks.
get numb. I mean, we can't become numb. I mean, it's in our face every day. Yeah.
But let me say this, though, and I said this for those of you who were up watching me on TV last night. We as Democrats can't keep taking the bait of Donald Trump. We got to stay away from his Twitter and all of his insanity. We as Democrats got to talk about issues that matter to people every single day and quit. Every time you talk about immigration, you're playing over in his battlefield. You got to stop it. Tell me how you're going to reduce prescription drug costs. Tell me how you're going to stop out-of-network hospital costs. Tell me what you're going to do on infrastructure, cybersecurity, workforce development. That's what the Democrats got to do. We got to quit playing Donald Trump's game.
I think I have time for one last question. Anna Lee tells me in the back of the room. So our former mayor of Little Rock, Lottie Shackelford, gets the last question. Actually, I get the last question, but Lottie, you get the next to the last question.
Let me just say this. In 2001 through 2005, I was the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. I only could because I had the greatest vice chair in the history of the Democratic National Committee,
Woo!
Lottie Shackelford.
Lottie Shackelford.
And the greatest mayor ever, right?
You know what? I learned from the best. I do want to thank you, Terry, for your openness, your candor, and for not being afraid to act. And having heard you tonight, and this question, I had many questions. Partly, you know, I'm constantly challenging folk to talk about racism as a nationwide thing as opposed to a regional, because it's not just the South, it's nationwide. But my question is, I also know how much you know about capitalism. And during this presidential cycle, we're beginning to hear, particularly on the Democratic side, some of the candidates are now beginning to say, well, you know, capitalism today is not the same as it was 50 years ago, where there was a shared interest in the workers as well as the profits. And so I want to know, based on your experiences, how do you feel capitalism is playing into exaggerating or making racism even more prevalent today? And what's that connection between how capitalism is practiced in 2019 and what that has to do with racism today?
Yeah, and you're hearing this debate going on a lot with our debates and where socialism versus capitalism. I'm a capitalist. I'll be very honest with everybody in this room. I don't want to shock anybody. You know, I say it, and listen, folks, you know, I'm a kid who started his first business when he was 14 years old. You know, I had to pay for college. I was able to do that. My first book, I taught ad nauseum. At 15 years old, I had a big truck. I was doing driveways, parking lots. I remember the day I went and got that truck. I'd convinced my Uncle Billy Byrne. I started at 14 doing parking lots or driveways. Then I said, I got to go big. I'm 15. I got to do parking lots. But you can't do that. You know, you need a big truck to get the tar. So I convinced my Uncle Billy I needed a truck. He said, oh, Terry, one day we'll go out and look. We got a bunch of old burned dairy trucks out in North Syracuse. I said, I need to go today, Uncle Billy. He said, well, you're not going today. Well, I went that day. He said North Syracuse. So I remember, folks, like it was yesterday. I drove out to North Syracuse. I had my buddy Joey Hartnett, and I had gas and spark plugs and oil. We found the big burned area, about 50 gigantic old dairy trucks. Most of you too young, but they used to deliver milk to you every day. I still remember Bernie, the milkman, coming every Thursday, hopefully getting a little chocolate milk. But big trucks, and I saw the truck I wanted, and I worked on it for about 2 hours as grass was up this high. Folks, I remember I jumped up in the big cab of this big, huge dairy truck, and we'd worked up with the oil and the gas, spark plugs, and I remember when I turned that key, and that engine roared to life. I still, to this day, get goosebumps. I'm a 15-year-old kid who had nothing. And I drove it home down Interstate 81, which is the big interstate in upstate New York. We go by the North Syracuse State Police substation. And I'm hitting the horn, I'm waving, the state police are out having coffee. I don't have a license. There are no license plates on the truck. But I was an entrepreneur, folks. And I went on, and I've done a lot of fun things. I was the youngest bank chairman in American history. And, I've had successes, I've had failures. It's part of being an entrepreneur. This is a great country. Now, are there things we need to do? Yeah. I didn't like Bush's tax cut that went to the wealthiest. It didn't do anything for most of the people in this room. It was stock buybacks. We got to get rid of that. But, we got to have a system that works for everybody. I travel all globally. I got to tell you, Stephanie, when I come home, there is nothing like coming back to the United States of America.
That's right.
I mean, honestly, for all the issues we got to deal with. So it's a great system, but we really got to take it to the next level. If Trump had come in office and done infrastructure like he promised, every governor, every mayor would have loved him. Had he left health care alone and built upon the 20 million people who'd signed up under the ACA, instead of ruining it by taking away the individual mandate and bringing uncertainty to the insurance market, which premiums have now gone up, and he stopped all of his crazy tweeting, with the economy, this guy would have been unbeatable, but he doesn't have that capacity. But I'm very optimistic of where we're going forward. But Lottie, we as a party, and I don't want to be negative on anybody, but not all corporations are bad. Not all businesses are bad. And we can't lump everybody in this thing. We are a great nation. We are. And we're a great nation because of who we are as immigrants. We are a mosaic tile. Unless you were Native American, folks, you came from somewhere else. Came in those first ships to Virginia in 1607. I mean, we're the birthplace. Don't forget that. That BS that they do up in Massachusetts on Thanksgiving. That was 1620. We were 1607. We were 13 years before that joke Plymouth Rock thing they try to talk about up there. I mean, honestly, it all comes back to Virginia. Yeah. But, I'm the ultimate optimist, and we're a great system. We got to tweak. There's so many things, just tweaking the tax code, incentivizing companies to give more money to their employees. We can do this, but Trump's not doing it. And I don't like the tariffs. I hate the tariffs. I'm a big pro-trade, free trader. Most governors are. I negotiated trade deals every single day as governor. I went to 35 countries. I did $32 billion worth of trade. Trump should have gone to the global economy, to all of our allies. China was really doing bad things, but he should have built an alliance and gone in China. No, he went at it alone. And now we've got these tariffs. In Virginia, when I was governor, I was selling $535 million a year of soybeans to China. You know what I sold this year? 18 million in 6 months. Wow. Farmers, their crops are rotten. He said he'd be tough on trade. He's being tough on farmers. He's not doing anything. He said, they're going to pay the tariffs, China. Well, then how come he just canceled the $300 billion? Because he said, I don't want to hurt Christmas sales. Well, how would it hurt Christmas sales if they're paying it? You get it. My point is, we're a great nation. We're strong because of our immigrant status, but we will not be strong, A, if you don't read the book, B, because I talk about we will not be strong unless we treat everybody with dignity, respect, no matter whom you love, no matter whom you pray to, no matter the color of your skin. When we are one, we are unified. There is nobody who can compete with the United States of America.
That's right. Well, I think President Clinton, who had a real vision for what he wanted the center to be, not just to look to the past, while the museum and the exhibits really paint a a very important portrait of America in the 90s, I think the Clinton Center is so much more. These type of programs are what he had in mind in his vision, and you know because you talked to him about it for years and years and years. A place like this where people from all walks of life can come together to really have a real conversation about important issues of the day. I know President Clinton would be pleased.
Well, first of all, let's give Stephanie a great round of applause, if we could, for the great work that she does.
Those are my two daughters right there yelling the loudest.
But let me just say this, because you're here in this beautiful Clinton Library and all the great work done. Bill Clinton was a great president of the United States of America, folks, and nobody should ever forget that. Just remember, he inherited this gigantic deficit, as Mac knows better than anybody, inherited from the Bush administration. He got to work, 23.8 million new jobs. People around the world loved America. I mean, think of it. Bob, you were there? Think of it. Everything was great. Everybody was treated great. So you are all fortunate here to be from Arkansas because you can claim one of your own. And I'll be honest, I'll finally say, I still talk to the president a couple times a week. I love the guy. I love the family. I love Hillary and Chelsea and everybody. You were just so blessed. And I just want, on behalf of the rest of the 49 states, thank you in Arkansas for giving us Bill Clinton as president of the United States.
Yes, sir. All right, I have one final question. As you've seen, the title of this lecture series is Bridge Builders, Conversations with Interesting People. And I have to say, you're pretty interesting, Terry. But one thing that makes this series unique is at the end of each program, we conclude with a call to action from our distinguished speaker. Really a charge to people here to do something that adds to the bridge that we're all supposed to be building together. I know you talked, I read the passage, you talked about people not just sitting around, that get up and do something. Tell the young people in this room, because I see college students, actually I see two UVA folks out here. We'll introduce you to them later. Jefferson Scholars, by the way, two Jefferson Scholars at UVA from Little Rock, Arkansas, right here.
Wow.
You girls stand up. I want to recognize you. Arkansans, the Hatley twins.
I don't want to rub any salt into it. NCAA men's basketball champions. NCAA men's lacrosse champion. Tennis, I could go on for half an hour, but I won't.
So, give us something to leave here. What can these young ladies and my two daughters, what can the young people here do to build that bridge? To make this a more perfect union?
First of all, I'd say young and old. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
When I say do something, first of all, the most important thing you can do is vote. And I'm still disgusted, folks. In 2016, we lost, Democrats lost, Hillary lost, 3 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, by 77,000 votes combined. 92 million Americans did not vote. Think of that. And they woke up the next day and said, holy cow. How did this happen? It happened because people didn't take part in democracy. Oh, Hillary's going to win, or whatever it may have been. And the consequences speak for themselves. The next year, and I think that's why I'm optimistic. So I would tell everybody here, you got to vote. And, you haven't had a lot of good statewides here, the Democrats winning statewide. I'll just tell you this, when I became governor, Republicans controlled all statewides. When I won, we swept, and we had the biggest pickup in 4 years of House of Delegates in 140 years. We in Virginia were red. Today, we are blue. Don't tell me you cannot do it, but you need candidates to lean in and stand for what you believe in. When I ran for governor, I'll be honest with you, this was Virginia, Southern State. I knew what I had to do to recruit Google, and I won Amazon. That was my bid. I wrote that. Google, Facebook, Microsoft, all came to Virginia. Why? Open and welcoming. When I ran for governor, pretty gutsy move, I was the first candidate or elected official in the South to come out for marriage equality. Why? I wanted to send a signal to all those Silicon Valley companies. We're open and welcoming. I told women I'd be a brick wall to protect their rights. And I'll be honest with you, I hunt, I'm a gun owner. I am the first nominee for governor in the history of Virginia on the Democratic side to get an F rating from the NRA, and I was damn proud of it. And I ran television commercials. And my point was, I'm going to run on what I believe in. And if I don't win, I'm not going to like it, but I'm going to get out of bed. I'm going to be okay the next day. My life will go on. What I will not do is, like so many politicians, they do polls and focus groups. I mean, what a joke, these focus groups. They get 20 people in a room and you give them Oreo cookies and they're supposed to tell you what type of campaign commercials you're supposed to run. I mean, really? I mean, honestly, Chips Ahoy. Oh, whoa, I think you ought to write this. What? So my point is you need folks. You like that, don't you? I mean, that's how I used to tell my campaign manager this all the time. I don't want to hear about, I'm not paying for focus groups. You're going to pay for them if you do them. But vote, recruit great candidates, and it may take a cycle or two, but golly, get out there and fight for what you really believe in. But also, Stephanie, I go back to education. To me, folks, it all comes down to education. Every child at the earliest age deserves a quality education, pre-K, K through 6. And if we're not doing it here, we have permanently hurt that child. Make sure you're active on school boards, forcing them in. That's what you really got to do. It happens at the local level.
Yes, it does.
Don't tell me you cannot do it. And push your elected officials.
Yes. Well, I told you guys this would be a really exciting evening. Did we deliver? I'm sure everybody here is going to go buy at least 2 books because you are a pretty good bookseller. Yes, if you don't already have your book, if you haven't purchased it, you can purchase them in the lobby from the Clinton Museum store. We've got plenty down there. And the book signing is going to take place, I'm being told, outside here. But I'd ask you to please stay in your seats so that we can escort the governor to his seat so he can get out here. Do you use Sharpies? You talked a lot about signing. Are you a Sharpie guy?
Yeah, I love Sharpies.
So we'll get the Sharpies ready and he will sign your books for you.
And I should say, finally, with the book, I don't make a penny on it. I'm donating all the proceeds to the Heather Heyer Foundation, to the state police who were killed in the line of duty, and to the victims of the August 12th.
Ladies and gentlemen, Terry McAuliffe.